He walked away, but he will regret it. What started as a calm day by the lake turned into a chilling mystery when a father and his young son vanished without a trace. Their boat returned alone, fishing rods still in place, and the waters kept their secret. Over 6 shocking videos follow the trail as investigators uncover the first scattered belongings, strange signs on the shore, and cryptic items that hint at a story no one could have predicted. The police have already found several clues, but will they be enough to reveal the truth, or is the lake holding something far more sinister than anyone imagined? The morning fog lay heavy over Lake Mirror, wrapping the water in a silvery cloak that blurred the boundary between lake and sky. The world seemed muted, the soft lap of the waves against the shore swallowed by the dense mist. The scent of pine and damp earth hung in the air, sharp and bitter in the early chill. On the small, weathered dock, a father and son prepared for their usual weekend ritual, fishing. The father, a man in his late 40s with a face weathered by wind and sun, checked the boat's engine meticulously, muttering under his breath about the importance of routine. His son, 12 years old and bursting with nervous energy, adjusted the fishing rods for what would be their 4th trip of the season. The water was calm, eerily so, reflecting the faint gray of the morning sky like a perfect mirror. There was an almost unnatural stillness, broken only by the occasional cry of a loon in the distance. They pushed off into the lake, or slicing silently through the water. The son cast his line with precision, his young hands steady despite his excitement. The father kept a watchful eye on him, a quiet pride softening the usual sternness etched into his features. This lake had always been their refuge, a place where worries dissolved and laughter echoed off the distant tree-lined shores. Yet, today something felt different. There was a strange hush, as if the lake itself were holding its breath. The fog thickened around them, tendrils curling over the edges of the boat. The father shook his head, dismissing the unease, attributing it to the early hour and the stillness of the morning. The boy, however, felt it too, a subtle, creeping anxiety that made him glance over his shoulder repeatedly. Hours passed with the usual rhythm of fishing, baiting hooks, casting lines, reeling in small catches. The father's hand brushed against the cool metal of the rods, checking the lines for tangles. Yet, as the sun began its lazy ascent, breaking through the gray haze and scattered shafts of pale light, something inexplicable happened. The father noticed the boat drifting slightly, despite having the engine off and the oars resting untouched. He leaned over to push it back toward a deeper spot, only to find that the oars had moved slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand. He frowned, his practical mind searching for a natural explanation, a stray current, an underwater movement. But nothing in his experience with this lake matched the sensation of the boat itself shifting without wind or human touch. By noon, the fog had lifted somewhat, revealing the full expanse of Lake Mirror, a pristine body of water surrounded by dense forest and rocky cliffs. The father looked around, calling out for any signs of disturbance, any other boaters or hikers that might explain the odd drift. The son, alert and now anxious, tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing toward the shore. "Dad, did you see that? There's nothing." "No one." His voice trembled slightly. The father nodded, trying to appear calm, but a cold knot had formed in his stomach. He glanced at the fishing rods, expecting to see his son's line wiggling with the pull of the fish, but both rods were still, unnaturally so. Then, in a moment that defied all reason, he noticed that something else was missing. The line that tethered their boat to the small anchor on a lake bed was gone. The ropes floated idly, unattached, as if cut by an invisible hand. Panic began to gnaw at the father's rational mind. He scanned the shoreline, searching for movement, voices, or evidence of another boat. Nothing. The lake remained a mirror, still and unyielding, reflecting the dense green of pine and spruce with unsettling perfection. The son's eyes were wide with fear. Where did they go?" he whispered, his voice trembling with the dawning realization. The father's mouth went dry. He realized that for the first time in his life, the familiar, comforting world around him had betrayed him. The boat, the rods, the carefully packed lunch, all remnants of normalcy, remained, but the two most important things in his life were gone. It was as if they had been erased from existence itself. Frantically, the father tried the radio, a handheld device that had always been reliable, but only static answered him. He tried calling their home number, the tone ringing into emptiness. Every method of communication failed, reinforcing the impossibility of the situation. His mind raced through every scenario. Had they fallen overboard? Could they have been taken by a sudden, unseen current? But the water was shallow here, calm, and too still for such an accident. His rational explanations unraveled with every heartbeat. The boy's small hand gripped his father's arm, seeking reassurance, and he realized there was none to give. All that remained was the stark, terrifying certainty that something beyond understanding had taken place. Hours seemed to pass in suspended time. The father tied the boat loosely to a nearby tree, his hands shaking, eyes scanning the water for any sign of movement. But the lake, impenetrable and silent, offered nothing. The wind stirred briefly, rippling the surface, and he thought he saw a shadow beneath the water, but it was gone in an instant, leaving only the reflection of the forest and the gray sky. The eerie stillness pressed down, a weight that seemed to hold him and his son in place, powerless. With a sinking feeling, he realized that the rules of the world they knew no longer applied here. Whatever had claimed his son and himself, though he was still physically present, was something that did not adhere to logic or reason. As evening approached, the father made his way back to the dock, the boat eerily empty save for the fishing rods standing upright, as if mocking the disappearance. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the strange sight. A boat returning alone, lines unbroken, the dock otherwise undisturbed. Questions began to buzz through the small lakeside community, whispers of the unexplainable. Where are they? How could this happen? Did anyone see anything? The father could offer no answers. Only the rods, the empty boat, and the growing fear that something had happened beyond comprehension. That night, the local authorities were called. Patrols combed the shoreline, dogs sniffing for a trace of the missing pair. Helicopters swept overhead, their searchlights cutting through the early darkness, but Lake Mirror yielded no clues. The water remained still, almost accusatory, reflecting the flashing lights like a cold, silent witness. The father sat on the dock, his son's favorite hat clutched in his hands, staring at the water as if it might offer a response. But the lake remained mute. Somewhere in its depths, or perhaps just beyond the edge of reason, the boy and the father had vanished, leaving only a boat that had returned without its occupants, fishing rods standing upright, and a community shrouded in dread and unanswered questions. A single question hung in the night air, heavy and unyielding. How could the boat return alone, with all its lines intact, yet leave two lives behind? And somewhere beneath the mirrored surface, the lake kept its secrets. The morning after the inexplicable disappearance of the father and son, the small lakeside community of Mirror Lake was already buzzing with unease, whispers spreading like wildfire through the cabin-lined shores and scattered homes nestled among the pines. The authorities arrived in force, a mixture of local deputies, state troopers, and volunteer search and rescue teams converging on the dock where the empty boat had returned as if it were carrying a ghostly message. The boat remained moored to the post, its hull rocking slightly in the gentle waves, fishing rods standing upright, perfectly still, as though mocking the frantic efforts of those who dared to question the impossible. The sheriff, a man who had spent 20 years patrolling these waters, ran his hand over the weathered wood, feeling the residual chill of the morning fog still clinging to it, and shook his head in disbelief, muttering that he had never encountered anything like this in all his years. Volunteers combed the shoreline, calling out names, tossing stones into the lake to gauge any response. But the water answered only with silence, the occasional ripple betraying no movement beneath the surface. Canine units, their noses keen and ears perked, pawed at the dock and the surrounding forest floor, sniffing for a trail, yet every sense seemed to dissipate into thin air, leaving them confused and frustrated. The sheriff called in the state police dive team, men in wetsuits and full gear who slid into the water with practiced efficiency. Yet even their torches revealed nothing but murky depths and the haunting reflection of the towering trees above. As the hours dragged on, the fog that had lifted the previous day returned, curling around the boat and dock in ghostly tendrils, wrapping the searchers in an unsettling embrace. The father's abandoned hat, lying on the dock, became a focal point for emotions, a symbol of vanished normalcy. Relatives arrived, their faces pale with worry, their hands shaking as they grasped the sheriff's arm, demanding answers that no one could provide. They questioned the volunteers, the officers, the dive team, but all reports were the same. The boat was empty, no footprints beyond the dock, no drag marks in the water, no evidence of struggle, only the quiet, infinite expanse of the lake staring back at them with opaque indifference. As the sun rose higher, the lake's surface glittered in patches of light, but the reflection did nothing to comfort those watching. The first theory offered by investigators, a tragic accident, perhaps the boat capsizing or a sudden slip into the cold water, was quickly questioned by family members, who insisted that both the father and son were strong swimmers, familiar with the lake's every rock and current, capable of handling the boat in conditions far worse than those that morning. They wouldn't just vanish, one relative muttered repeatedly, voice breaking, eyes fixed on the still waters. Search grids were expanded to the surrounding forest, where the dense pine and spruce created a natural labyrinth of shadows and unseen corners. Helicopters hovered above, their engines slicing the air, searchlights cutting through the fog, yet the camera feeds and infrared scopes yielded no signs of movement, no heat signatures to indicate that anyone had survived the disappearance. Divers moved further along the lake bed, probing rocky ledges and sudden drops, but the sonar painted only the empty, undisturbed bottom, as though the two had been removed from existence itself. Small debris, twigs, floating leaves, the occasional fishing lure, were cataloged meticulously, each item examined and discarded as either irrelevant or natural, yet the void remained, an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on every person present. Rumors began to circulate among the volunteers. Strange lights seen over the lake the night before, the sudden cessation of birdsong at dawn, a faint, inexplicable echo of voices on the wind. The sheriff frowned at such tales, though he could not entirely dismiss them, for the usual wildlife patterns had been off, and several experienced outdoorsmen reported a subtle, unnerving change in the atmosphere that morning, a sense that the lake itself had shifted in some fundamental way. Meanwhile, the state police dispatched a team to interview neighbors and anyone who might have been nearby. Reports were consistent yet baffling. No one had seen the boat leave. No one had heard cries or struggles. No engines other than the father's had been audible. One elderly man, a retired fisherman who had spent his life on Lake Mirror, described the water as watching, waiting, holding its breath, and his words lingered in the minds of those who had heard them, strange and chilling in their precision. As the day wore on, the searchers noticed subtle anomalies. A line of reeds bent unnaturally along the shore, suggesting recent passage, yet no footprints marred the soft earth. A small splash where the boat had drifted at first light, yet no disturbance extended beyond it. The occasional ripple, as if something had just slipped below the surface, leaving the water perfectly still again moments later. The dive team's sonar picked up odd echoes, brief, fleeting blips that defied identification, prompting tense whispers and rapid communication between boats and helicopters. Each discovery, however minor, heightened tension rather than eased it, reinforcing the sense that something beyond normal comprehension had taken place. By afternoon, volunteers were exhausted, yet no progress had been made, only questions accumulating like storm clouds above the lake. In a makeshift command center on the dock, maps were spread out, pins marking search grids, notes scrawled hastily about currents, wind directions, last known positions, and witness statements. Every piece of data seemed to contradict the next, forming a puzzle with missing pieces too large to ignore. The sheriff, weary and unshaven, paced back and forth, rubbing his temples, while deputies typed up reports and coordinated teams. He was no stranger to challenging searches, but the absence of any physical evidence left him unnerved in a way he could not articulate. He glanced at the father's fishing rods, still standing upright in the boat, perfectly aligned, untouched by time or weather, and felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The son's small, blue life vest remained neatly folded in the bottom of the boat, the straps fastened as if awaiting its wearer's return, yet he would not come. Volunteers and relatives scanned the tree-line endlessly, some venturing further into the forest with tracking dogs, their boots crunching needles and dry leaves, ears straining for cries or rustling. Shadows seemed to move unnaturally, a trick of fog and light, yet the searchers could not shake the feeling that eyes watched from unseen perches. A ranger, experienced in backcountry rescues, noted that the forest was unnervingly quiet, the usual birds and squirrels absent, and the wind whispered through the trees in a strange, melodic pattern that unsettled even the most seasoned trackers. Rumors began circulating online, fed by anxious family members posting on local forums. Some claimed sightings of a figure on the lake that night, glowing faintly. Others spoke of strange noises near the dock, a low hum vibrating through the air. The sheriff warned against hysteria, but the undercurrent of fear was palpable. That evening, the search was extended into the surrounding hills, volunteers climbing rocky slopes, scanning the lake from above, only to find that the boat seemed almost perfectly placed, as if it had glided back to the dock under its own will. The father's wallet and the son's small tackle box were found on the dock, untouched, further heightening the mystery. A lone photographer attempting to capture the scene for documentation reported that the camera froze for several minutes, the display flickering, only to reveal a faint, blurry outline on the water's surface that vanished before he could focus. As night fell, the lake took on a glassy stillness, reflecting the fading light of the setting sun in long, distorted streaks of gold and gray. Search teams reluctantly withdrew to camp, maintaining night watches along the shore. Fires flickered in the darkness, their warmth unable to pierce the pervasive chill that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. The sheriff sat with the boy's father's friend, who had come to assist, recounting every moment of the morning, every observation, every tiny anomaly. Each retelling only deepened the sense of incomprehensible strangeness, as if the lake had swallowed not only the father and son, but the very rules that governed reality. Sleep was fitful for all, dreams haunted by the image of the boat drifting alone, the fishing rods upright and silent, the water so perfectly still that it became a mirror reflecting a world that no longer made sense. Before dawn, the fog returned once more, thick and suffocating, swallowing the dock, the boat, and the remaining searchers in its cold embrace. A lone volunteer, scanning the lake with a flashlight, swore he saw ripples that formed into the faint outline of two figures just beneath the surface, only to vanish as quickly as they appeared. By morning, when the sun finally began to push through the haze, the lake seemed to have returned to normal, calm and serene, betraying nothing of the terror that had gripped those who searched its waters. But the questions remained. How had the father and son vanished without a trace? What force, natural or otherwise, could have returned the boat alone, leaving rods, life vest, and other personal items untouched? And what, if anything, awaited those who dared to venture back on a Lake Mirror in the hope of finding them? The sheriff, weary yet resolute, stared at the still water, a knot of unease settling deep in his chest. Somewhere beneath the mirrored surface, or perhaps just beyond the veil of reason, the answers waited, hidden, refusing to yield, as the lake kept its secrets once more silent, endless, and haunting. And above all, the most pressing question loomed, unspoken but heavy. Who, or what, had taken them, and would they ever return? Days had passed since the father and son vanished from Lake Mirror, and the initial shock and panic had begun to give way to a grim determination among the searchers and local authorities, yet the lake's silence remained unbroken, as though it were deliberately mocking every effort to uncover the truth. The sheriff, once confident in conventional explanations, now found himself haunted by the impossible, replaying every detail in his mind, questioning what he had seen, what he hadn't, and what might have been overlooked. The sonar readings from the divers, the thermal scans from the helicopters, and the meticulous searches along the shoreline and in the surrounding forest had produced nothing conclusive, only fleeting anomalies that were dismissed at first but now seemed increasingly significant. Theories began to diverge among the teams. Some insisted on an accidental fall, an underwater trap, or a hidden current. Others whispered about something stranger, inexplicable, yet no one dared speak it aloud for fear of ridicule. The media had arrived, reporters standing along the dock with cameras and notepads, broadcasting live shots of the empty boat, the upright rods, and the fog-draped lake, and each broadcast seemed to intensify the mystery rather than clarify it, the viewers' questions echoing the same ones that haunted those on site. How could a boat return alone, perfectly moored, with everything intact, and yet 2 lives be gone? The sheriff called a meeting with his team, and for the first time, they openly debated abandoning traditional search methods and considering alternative approaches, including reviewing the father's and son's recent activities, possible encounters, and personal communications. It was discovered that the father had recently withdrawn a series of maps from the local library, maps of lesser-known trails, hidden coves, and obscure fishing spots, areas that even experienced locals seldom visited. When confronted, the family insisted that he had always been cautious but curious, exploring off-limits or rarely traveled paths, yet nothing suggested any risk that could explain the sudden disappearance. Meanwhile, an amateur drone operator volunteering with the search team had captured footage of the lake's northern end, where the fog often lingered longer than elsewhere, and in the playback, the sheriff noticed something peculiar. A brief, shimmering distortion above the water's surface, almost like a ripple in the air itself, something moving in a pattern that could not be explained by wind or wildlife. The footage was scrutinized frame by frame, yet no frame revealed more than a suggestion, a fleeting shadow that vanished as soon as it appeared, leaving only the still, mirrored lake beneath. Encouraged and unnerved in equal measure, the sheriff organized a new search pattern, focusing on the northern coves and surrounding cliffs, but this time using a combination of divers, thermal imaging, and volunteers equipped with night vision scopes to cover angles previously ignored. As the teams moved into these areas, subtle but strange phenomena began to appear. Reeds bent in unnatural curves, footprints leading to dense underbrush that abruptly ended, and the faintest impressions in soft mud that seemed older than the timeline would allow. Search dogs reacted erratically, their ears twitching toward unseen sounds, growls erupting for no apparent reason, then settling as if whatever had disturbed them had vanished instantly. Meanwhile, investigators began combing through personal electronics. The father's laptop and phone showed a series of unusual searches, coordinates typed and erased, notes about timing and currents, and a downloaded PDF of local maps with certain trails circled. But strangely, several files were corrupted or encrypted in ways that suggested deliberate tampering. The son's tablet, a device filled with innocent games and videos, also held traces of location data that did not match the boat's departure point, indicating that in the days leading up to their trip, they may have ventured elsewhere, though no one could confirm where or why. As investigators pieced together these anomalies, a sense of unease gripped the search teams. It was no longer just a question of a missing boat. It was a question of whether the rules they had understood, the laws of nature, the boundaries of possibility, applied here at all. Local residents contributed their own eerie observations. One reported hearing a child's laughter echoing across the lake in the dead of night, though the shore was deserted. Another swore they saw a fleeting glimmer of light in the fog, like a lantern moving against the wind, vanishing as they approached. Yet another claimed the fish, normally abundant in this part of the lake, had become strangely silent, refusing to bite even when baited. At the makeshift command center, the sheriff convened a meeting with a forensic analyst and a digital investigation specialist, examining every piece of evidence, from weather data to GPS logs, each analysis reinforcing the baffling nature of the disappearance. It was during this session that the first truly unexplainable clue emerged. A photograph taken by one of the volunteers showed the boat at the dock, rods upright. Yet in the reflection of the water behind the boat, two blurred figures could be faintly seen standing on the surface, not in the boat, as though hovering or partially submerged in a way that defied logic. The image sent ripples of tension through the room. Every person stared in disbelief, trying to rationalize the anomaly, yet no conventional explanation could account for it. As the investigation deepened, the sheriff and his team decided to widen the search beyond the lake, considering the possibility of a planned abduction or a premeditated disappearance. Interviews with friends, family, and acquaintances revealed that the father and son had met with no one unusual, no strangers, no unusual encounters. Everything suggested normalcy, making the vanishing all the more mystifying. Volunteers began to search remote hiking trails, caves, and hidden clearings, often venturing into dangerous terrain where a single misstep could lead to injury. One team discovered a small, makeshift campsite tucked beneath a rocky overhang near the northern cove, yet it was empty, with only traces of fire long extinguished, a tin cup, and a single footprint that could not conclusively be matched to anyone involved. Nightfall brought new challenges. The lake's surface reflected the moonlight with deceptive clarity, while shadows seemed to move in ways that contradicted the angle of the moon, and searchers reported feelings of being watched, disoriented, or hearing whispers carried on the wind. A volunteer, scanning the tree-line with night vision, froze when a flicker of movement appeared in the woods. A small figure, perhaps a child, stepping briefly into view before vanishing entirely. And despite immediate pursuit, nothing was found. Reports like these grew, each adding layers of tension and fear. The sheriff began reviewing local legends. The following morning, the fog hung low over Lake Mirror, a thick, almost tangible curtain that muffled every sound and distorted familiar shapes into sinister forms. And yet the searchers, undeterred by the eerie calm, pressed onward with a grim determination that had become almost ritualistic over the past weeks. Each new day brought fresh eyes, fresh volunteers, and an increasing array of equipment. Boats equipped with side-scan sonar, drones with infrared cameras, divers trained for cold, deep water searches, and even geologists called in to assess the shifting lake bed, because everyone had come to realize that whatever had taken the father and son was clever, deliberate, or governed by forces that defied understanding, and every tool at their disposal was now necessary. At first light, a small reconnaissance team ventured toward the northern cove, the site where the previous day's SD card discovery suggested something unusual might be happening beneath the water's surface. And as they approached the area, The lake itself seemed to react. Ripples formed without wind, subtle glimmers appeared beneath the surface, and the sonar readings produced patterns that no one could immediately explain, almost as if a large object moved just out of reach, below the thermocline, teasing them with its presence, yet remaining frustratingly elusive. As divers plunged into the frigid depths, the water seemed to resist, pulling at them in ways that felt almost alive, currents swirling unpredictably, visibility dropping to mere inches despite the clear morning above, and every touch of the lake bed revealed only silt, rocks, and the occasional snag branch. But then, in one narrow trench near the submerged outcrop, the sonar picked up a sharply defined shape, rectangular and metallic, partially buried in mud, with edges that glinted unnaturally even through layers of sediment. It was a discovery that shifted the entire investigation from a missing persons case to something far more complex, something that suggested intent and careful concealment. The divers worked cautiously, excavating with gloved hands, revealing a small, waterproof container, nondescript except for a faint emblem etched into the surface, one that none of the locals recognized. Inside, layers of waterproof envelopes, each meticulously labeled and sealed, contained maps, handwritten notes, and a collection of photographs that immediately drew gasps from the examining team. Because among the photos were images not only of the father and son fishing at the lake, but also of locations they had never disclosed, secret trails, hidden groves, and markings carved into trees that seemed to form a pattern, a deliberate trail pointing toward unknown destinations in the surrounding forest. The handwritten notes were equally puzzling. They contained cryptic references to times, coordinates, and environmental conditions, observations that suggested the father had been documenting something for weeks, perhaps months, and the tone of the notes shifted from casual curiosity to urgent concern in a way that unsettled everyone who read them, hinting an awareness of unseen dangers, of someone or something, monitoring movements along the lake and its surrounding areas. Simultaneously, digital analysis of the SD card discovered earlier revealed additional metadata, timestamps that contradicted the official timeline, images of the lake at odd hours, and a video clip so brief it might have been overlooked had it not been for enhanced review, showing a faint shimmer beneath the water as if a figure, human or otherwise, had been captured in a fleeting moment before disappearing beneath the surface, leaving behind only the faintest disturbance in the otherwise pristine water. This revelation prompted the sheriff to expand the search perimeter dramatically, involving additional diving teams, kayakers, and volunteers who were assigned to survey hidden inlets, submerged rock formations, and submerged vegetation beds that could conceal or obscure evidence. Every hour spent in the water yielded tantalizing hints, a glint of metal, a fragment of fabric, but never the father or son themselves, their absence growing more haunting with each passing moment. Meanwhile, on land, analysts began to cross-reference the new maps and photographs with known topography, historical records, and local lore. What emerged was a strange overlay of natural formations and human markings, patterns that suggested the possibility of an intentional pathway, a network of secretive or clandestine access points, almost as if the lake and forest had been used for decades to hide something from plain sight. This theory gained weight when a retired park ranger, volunteering to assist in the investigation, pointed out that several of the locations photographed by the father coincided with sites known in the past for illicit activities, smuggling, and unregulated construction along secluded waterways, lending credibility to the idea that the disappearance might involve foul play or, at the very least, a deliberate concealment rather than a simple accident. That afternoon, while examining one of the remote coves, a small team discovered a makeshift shelter hidden beneath an overhanging rock ledge, its interior carefully constructed from branches and tarps, yet abandoned. Inside were footprints in dried mud, not easily identifiable, a partially eaten ration bar, and a weathered notebook. Water damaged, but legible enough to reveal frantic scrawls detailing movements of someone tracking the lake and its surroundings, their focus intensely on the father and son, suggesting that the pair may have been observed or even pursued over a period of time. The existence of this shelter sent shockwaves through the team. If someone had been monitoring them, could they have been kidnapped? Could the father have known more than he let on? And if so, who would be capable of such precise, silent surveillance in a wilderness area monitored daily by locals and authorities alike? That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, the lake glimmered with a deceptive calm. But the team at the command post analyzed the day's findings, growing increasingly aware that a larger puzzle was at play, a puzzle that involved knowledge of the lake, the surrounding terrain, and the behavior of the father and son, a puzzle that suggested intelligence, preparation, and possibly a motive hidden from everyone observing from the shore. The sheriff, feeling the weight of responsibility, began to consider that what they had stumbled upon was not merely a missing persons case, but the days stretched into an almost unbearable rhythm as the investigation reached a fever pitch, with search teams combing the lake and surrounding forests from dawn until well past dusk. Every movement of the water, every rustle in the trees, every flicker of light in the fog now scrutinized with obsessive intensity. And the once simple search for a father and son fishing on a quiet lake had transformed into a labyrinthine puzzle that seemed to defy reason. The sheriff, now sleep-deprived and consumed by the case, reviewed each piece of evidence repeatedly, attempting to trace connections that might reveal the truth hidden within layers of contradictions and anomalies. And yet each clue seemed only to raise more questions, as if Lake Mirror itself were playing a deliberate game, concealing answers behind a veneer of tranquility that belied the chaos beneath. The SD card, the waterproof envelopes, the photographs, and the handwritten notes had been pieced together to form an unsettling narrative. The father had been meticulously mapping the lake, identifying hidden coves, submerged pathways, and unusual currents, perhaps in preparation for an exploratory fishing trip or to document something extraordinary that he had witnessed. Yet no one could determine whether his intent had been purely observational or a desperate attempt to anticipate a threat. He had sensed. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the footprints, impressions, and personal items discovered in hidden areas revealed startling patterns. Multiple sets of footprints converged at the lake's edge and abruptly ended, mud and debris disturbed in a manner inconsistent with natural movement, and small personal effects, some belonging to the father and son and others unidentified, carefully arranged as if intentionally staged, leaving investigators uncertain whether they were signs of voluntary departure, abduction, or something altogether more inexplicable. One morning, a diver surfaced, clutching a waterproof container that had been lodged beneath a submerged boulder. Inside were additional photographs showing the father and son moments before their disappearance. The lake's surface calm and mirrored, yet in the reflections, faint shapes could be perceived, elongated, indistinct, almost humanoid, appearing to hover just above or beneath the water. Impossible to interpret, yet impossible to ignore, and the team, viewing the images on high resolution monitors, felt the chilling certainty that the lake itself had been the stage for events beyond conventional understanding. As the search intensified, the sheriff authorized a more aggressive approach. Drones were deployed in formation to scan the lake at various altitudes. Divers were instructed to use sonar sweeps in previously unreachable depths, and local guides were called to trace hidden trails that might have been overlooked, paths leading into dense forest, across uneven terrain, and along cliffs where misstep could prove fatal. It was on one of these extended searches that a volunteer stumbled upon a series of markers etched into the trees, a combination of scratches, notches, and symbols arranged in a sequence, almost like coordinates, leading toward a narrow inlet surrounded by dense brush and partially submerged rocks. The markings were subtle, easily missed, yet consistent with the locations documented in the father's notes, suggesting a premeditated trail or a set of instructions left deliberately for someone to follow. Following this trail, the team discovered a hidden alcove along the shoreline, previously invisible from any vantage point on the water. Within, there were signs of recent activity, footprints in the soft soil, a smoldering fire pit, and remnants of food, all suggesting that someone had been here not long ago, but no one could identify who, leaving the unsettling implication that the father and son might have encountered another presence, human or otherwise. That evening, as the fog thickened over the lake, the sheriff and a small reconnaissance team set up surveillance along the shoreline and in nearby trees, scanning the surface with thermal imaging and listening for any unusual sounds. And as night deepened, subtle disturbances appeared, small ripples on the water in areas where no wind blew, a faint glow beneath the surface that seemed to shift in pattern, and an occasional, almost imperceptible sound, like breathing or movement, emanating from depths that should have been silent. By the third night of this intensified observation, a breakthrough occurred. A remote camera, positioned on a high branch overlooking the northern cove, captured a fleeting event, a dark shape moving beneath the water, interacting with the father and son's abandoned boat, seemingly pushing or pulling it in a deliberate manner, and then vanishing back into the depths, leaving ripples that spread unnaturally across the lake's surface. The footage, when reviewed frame by frame, revealed movements too precise and coordinated to be caused by currents or wildlife, suggesting intelligence, intent, and control beyond anything the searchers had anticipated. Simultaneously, analysts reviewed the contents of the SD card once more, correlating timestamps with environmental data. Wind patterns, tides, temperature changes, and minor tremors in the lake bed revealed subtle consistencies, patterns that might have allowed a careful observer to predict behavior or locate hidden passages, implying that the father may have understood aspects of the lake that others did not. Yet even this knowledge did not explain the sudden disappearance, nor the strange phenomena now observed. Adding to the complexity, forensic experts examining the discovered personal items noted evidence of water exposure inconsistent with natural submersion. Mud and debris were displaced in ways that suggested manipulation, almost as if the items had been moved deliberately underwater and then left to resurface at intervals. This raised terrifying possibilities, including staged evidence, abduction, or interaction with an unknown force capable of manipulating objects in ways that defied ordinary explanation. Meanwhile, family members, desperate for any insight, began sharing overlooked details. Recollections of the father speaking cryptically about watchers, hidden currents, and places that appear only when the fog lifts, as well as the son mentioning a fascination with the lake's mysterious behavior during storms and fog, noting patterns of ripples, reflections, and strange lights. These memories, once dismissed as eccentricities, now appeared prescient, hinting at an awareness of the lakes, secrets that no one else had recognized. On the seventh day of intensified operations, a diver surfaced clutching a submerged bag, inside which were personal effects of both the father and son, carefully sealed in waterproof packaging. However, when examined, these items bore no signs of trauma, yet there was a subtle. As the first light of dawn broke over Lake Mirror, casting a pale, golden haze across the mist-laden water, the search teams gathered at the northern inlet, the place where the boat had been observed moving mysteriously the night before, and a tense silence fell over the group, each person aware that the culmination of weeks of tireless searching, countless dead ends, cryptic clues, and unnerving anomalies was finally within reach. Every diver, drone operator, and volunteer held their breath, scanning the water and shoreline with instruments, eyes, and intuition, hoping that the final piece of the puzzle would reveal itself and provide the answers that had eluded them for so long. The sheriff, weary but resolute, directed the teams with precision, coordinating movements between the water, the forest, and observation points on high ground. Aware that this would be the defining moment of the investigation, and yet a gnawing uncertainty lingered because Lake Mirror had already defied all conventional understanding, demonstrating intelligence, unpredictability, and control over events that had left seasoned investigators questioning what was possible. Divers entered the water cautiously, following the subtle currents and glowing patterns that had become a signature of the lake's mysterious behavior. Beneath the surface, sonar scans revealed anomalies consistent with earlier observations, shapes, shadows, and movements that seemed deliberate, almost sentient, guiding divers along concealed channels, past submerged rock formations, and through twisting underwater passages that had been invisible to any casual observer. It was along one of these passages that a diver, reaching a secluded underwater alcove, discovered a narrow tunnel that led to a small, air-filled chamber hidden beneath the overhangs of submerged cliffs. Inside were remnants of the father and son's fishing gear, carefully arranged, as if left intentionally. But most striking was a waterproof journal, floating slightly above the silt-covered floor, perfectly preserved despite weeks of immersion. When the diver surfaced with the journal, the command team gathered around, and with gloved hands, carefully opened it to reveal entries chronicling not only the father's meticulous observations of Lake Mirror, but also his increasingly urgent notes regarding unusual phenomena, unexplained ripples, lights beneath the water, currents that shifted unpredictably, and strange encounters with shadows or shapes that seemed almost human. Each entry suggested that the father had recognized the lake's peculiar behavior and had attempted to document it for posterity, leaving a trail that would allow someone to understand the patterns, to navigate safely, and perhaps to survive. Among the journal pages, the final entry stood out, written with a sense of clarity and resolve. We are not lost. The lake tests those who enter. Follow the currents, trust the signs, and you may see the world as it truly is. I know this journey will be misunderstood, but it is necessary. We go where the lake calls, and we must trust its guidance. The tone suggested awareness, purpose, and a profound understanding of forces beyond ordinary comprehension, implying that the father and son had entered a domain within the lake that operated according to rules unknown to outsiders. Simultaneously, drone footage captured subtle, synchronized ripples emanating from points surrounding the cove, patterns that mirrored diagrams the father had sketched in his notes, almost as if the lake itself were orchestrating a display, guiding observers to the alcove where the journal and other items had been concealed, a silent communication between the vanished and the living. On shore, investigators began piecing together the significance of every previously discovered clue. The SD card, the envelopes, the photographs, the tree markings, and the hidden caches, and it became increasingly evident that the father and son had interacted with the lake in ways that suggested intentional participation rather than mere victimhood. They had understood, anticipated, and perhaps even embraced the mysterious phenomena, leaving breadcrumbs that only those willing to interpret the signs correctly could follow. Yet even as the journal offered insight, it provided no simple resolution. The father and son themselves were not physically recovered, their absence remaining the central enigma, and the lake maintained its aura of otherworldly control, a place where human intentions intersected with forces both natural and inexplicable, defying any attempt to assert dominance or certainty. In the weeks that followed, the investigative team focused on decoding the remaining patterns, cross-referencing the father's notes with environmental data, historical records, and local accounts. Anomalies were cataloged, correlations were drawn, and slowly, a model emerged suggesting that Lake Mirror's currents, topography, and subtle optical effects could create self-contained microenvironments where objects, boats, and even people could move in ways that appeared deliberate and intelligent from above, yet were fundamentally shaped by hidden natural forces, tides, and underwater topography, augmented by precise human interaction. The sheriff, reflecting on the exhaustive investigation, came to a somber but profound conclusion. The disappearance was likely a combination of human foresight, meticulous planning, and the lake's unique and unforgiving natural characteristics, rather than malicious intent by a third party. Yet the mystery of the lake's apparent intelligence could not be fully explained, leaving a lingering sense of awe and respect for the environment and its hidden complexities. Family members, though devastated by the continued absence of the father and son, found some solace in the recovery of the journal and personal items, understanding that their loved ones had prepared, anticipated, and engaged with the lake's enigmatic nature, leaving a trail of evidence that spoke to their courage, intelligence, and adaptability. The final revelations underscored themes of trust, intuition, and the intimate relationship between humans and the natural world, highlighting how observation, patience, and respect for the environment could illuminate truths that brute force or conventional methods might never reveal. By the conclusion of the search, the lake had returned to a deceptive calm, its surface unbroken, its depths concealing secrets that might never be fully comprehended. And yet the story of the father and son became a cautionary tale, a testament to human curiosity, resilience, and the intricate dance between knowledge and mystery. The sheriff and his team presented their findings, emphasizing the extraordinary natural dynamics of Lake Mirror, the meticulous records left by the father, and the implications of interacting with a landscape that could confound, challenge, and ultimately transcend ordinary understanding, leaving the community with both closure and a profound awareness of the lake's enduring power. In the end, the final question remained, haunting yet instructive. Could such a disappearance happen again?